everyone, this is John. You are with me for another episode of our weekly show, The Subcontinent. Our program focuses on few of the most critical, sensitive, and important issues in the subcontinent, which is a region which hosts almost 25% of the global population. So let's dive into our segment, break down issues, take expert opinion, and see what people say.
In this edition of The Subcontinent, we shall look into India's railway privatization. Also, we will explore the pros and cons of this bumpy road.
India's government is moving ahead with its privatization initiative in many spheres. Now, it is time for the Indian Railways. The Indian Railways is the third largest railway network in the world by size, with a route length of about 70,000 kilometers. It has always been the network that connects India, but opening it to private investors may make it less available for most of the people.
The privatization of Indian railways has been recommended for many decades. But recently, the government officially started the process to allow private firms to operate passenger trains on its network via 151 new trains. This marks the beginning of private sector participation in passenger train operations. Last year, the government decided that the Indian Railways will restructure all its 7 production units and associated workshops, including like ICF Perambur, RCF Kapurthula, Modern Coach Factory and Raebareli, into a cooperation called Indian Railways Roll Stocking Company. The railways is not the only sector Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government is opening to the corporates. The government has already invited the private firms to other sectors like coal mines, banks, defense, oil, insurance, electricity, telecom, space and atomic energy.
They are selling off the public sector big factories and institutions. Even the railways are being privatized. One train has been sold, and the people working on that train have to work for 18 hours of the day. They have fallen sick. This is the future that they are showing.
The process has its own merits and demerits, as experts say the measure is a clash between the consequences of the need for modernization versus social obligations.
A few weeks ago, in early July 2020, the Railway Ministry announced that 151 trains in 109 pair of routes will be operated by private sectors with a 30,000 crore rupees investment. There are ideas and people both in favor and against the plan. Some see privatization as the way forward, and some mention the unfavorable outcomes that may follow the move.
Although the initial phase of the privatization would cover a small part of the entire railway network, liberalizing the entry of new operators in the public transport may be the path for improving services and facilitating growth of the sector. Those in favor of the project believe fares in private trains will be competitive, and the introduction of private players would eventually increase the number of trains, ensuring high availability on demand and punctuality. The proponents argue that privatization means higher quality of services, which can help India renovate its fleet and accommodate the latest technology in railways, coaches, safety and travelling experience. They say privatization will lead to better infrastructure, which in turn would lead to improved safety, reduction in travel time and etc. Indian railway services are marred by issues like lack of punctuality, mismanagement in the form of stinking washrooms, lack of water supply and dirty platforms. Privatization may solve these issues, as the move would foster competition and hence lead to overall betterment in the quality of services. Thereby, it may help Indian Railways to become a world-class network, but some believe it may simply backfire.
The proponents of privatization say that it creates jobs and fosters modernization. But those on the other side argue that only the driver and guard will be railway employees. All other employees will be part of the private company who has won the contract to operate the train. The private companies are free to procure train and locomotives from any source of their choice. This may be a threat to national production and self-reliance.
Opponents of India's privatization of railways speak of numerous limitations for the project, including increased fares and disconnecting some less trodden parts of the country. Not unexpectedly, private enterprise runs on profit, and the easiest way to profit from their investment may be to hike fares. The huge increase in the ticket fare would render the service beyond the reach of lower-income groups and destroy the initial purpose of the railways, which is meant to serve the entire population irrespective of the level of income. An advantage of government-owned railways is that it provides nationwide connectivity to bring regional development. This would not continue with privatization because routes which are less popular, hence less profitable, may be neglected. This can have a negative impact on connectivity. Some parts of the country, including regions with rugged terrain and low population density, like Himalayan states and northeastern states, may become virtually inaccessible. Privatization may drop them out of the process of development.
Another concern about the plan is the confusion on land titles and land use as the properties are dated. The Railways Company says that there is no change required in the regulations to carry out the project, but local authorities in many places do not agree to it. Most of the stations are located in the crowded and old parts of the cities, away from the new infrastructure. To make the project commercially viable, a holistic plan for the development of the entire catchment area is required, instead of just the standalone station plan. According to the data maintained by the World Bank, in 2018, India had 68,443 kilometers of route of railways. It is among the 4 largest rail networks in the world, along with the United States, China, and Russia. Although every kilometer of track in India covers geographical area much less than Germany, Russia, China, or Canada, indicating scope for expansion.
If the privatization of Asia's oldest railway is implemented as planned, modern trains will be added to the network, which needs heavy investment in rolling stock like coaches and engines. Moreover, there is the cost of operations, which includes electricity, manpower, and all other equipment. Such a scenario means all the facilities should be upgraded with better onboard services and faster trains. Who's going to pay this huge modernization expense? The railways company, private investors, or people? The plan enables investors to make money either by monetizing land and airspace by setting up shops, kiosks, advertisement hoardings, parking lots, offices, and residential properties. The sector is already in decline and losing business to other modes like air and road. Operating passenger trains is a loss-making business for Indian Railways. It recovers only around 57% of the cost through tickets on an average. The rest is cross-subsidized through earnings from its freight operations.
All right, gentlemen, our team has collected a few media coverages in this regard, which we would really appreciate if you could take a look. So let's just get to the media and then we can come back to the question answer session. Please stay with us.
Asia's oldest rail network will invite applications for modernizing stations across the country every month. But for that, Indian Railways will have to overcome delays, streamline approvals, and cut red tape, things that derailed the effort earlier. But drawing interest from the private sector for station upgrade has been harder than thought, as delays and stringent conditions made it unviable. Envisioned in 2004 to 2005, the project failed to take off. Modi renewed it in 2016 with a plan to redevelop 400 stations. Immediately after the announcement, as usual, the bucks started welcoming the decision of the government. Unfortunately, in our country, the mainstream of the media, instead of speaking the truth without fear, has been reduced to being drum beaters of the present government. The government continue its loyalty to the interests of the corporate sector, and the common people's interests are always buried. It is estimated that almost 70% of freight trains, which now jostle for space with passenger trains on the overcrowded Indian railway network, will shift to the two upcoming dedicated freight corridors from December 2021. This will free up a lot of capacity to introduce more passenger trains with better services and higher speeds.
Now, for more analysis, let me welcome our guest to the show, Mr. Mohan Guruswamy, the chairman of Center for Policy Alternatives and a former advisor to the Indian Finance Minister Yashwant Sinha. We also have with us Mr. Raghunandan, who is with the Delhi Science Forum, a non-profit think tank. Let's start with Mr. Guruswamy. Mr. Guruswamy, are we expecting a privatization of the Indian railways?
Such a thing, let me tell you, is practically impossible. For a start, it's the biggest railway system in the world. It's got over 1.2 million employees, and it runs at a loss. It's hugely subsidized. Privatization would imply that somebody has to come and buy it, and it has to run profitably. It won't happen because a lot of the economy rides on the cheap movement of people from place to place. For instance, migrant labor. Millions move every year from different parts of India to work in the big cities, and they go back in the off-season. They travel on the subsidized railway. Even passengers and commercial travelers who travel use the subsidized benefit. The cost of passengers is subsidized by the freight. Railway freight is now becoming very expensive. Now, the problem with having the existing system is the people who are willing to spend lots of money for the luxury of train travel are unable to do so because the railways are just not able to maintain high-class railway travel because they're subsidizing the poorer passengers. Here, what is going to happen for the first time is that the coaches are going to be owned, the stock is going to be owned by private parties, and they're going to operate it on the railway system, pay the railways for use of track, pay the railways for use of signaling, pay the railways for use of railway platforms, and all that. But this does not mean that all passenger trains will be privatized. It's impossible, cannot happen, and nobody would want to invest money in something which is loss-making. And private railways, besides their experience, has not been good anywhere in the world. In the US, you hardly have any private railway systems, and the ones which barely function. In Britain, it has been a huge failure after Margaret Thatcher privatized them. So it won't happen in India. I don't think it can happen in India, nor will it happen in India.
So, Mr. Raghunandan, what do you think?
Well, the privatization is taking place in bits and pieces. There is privatization of 400 main railway stations compared to thousands of railway stations in the country. There is privatization of a few selected routes, premium routes, but which are medium length routes. They are being handed over to private players. And there is privatization of some services like catering, food services on trains. So broadly speaking, I agree that this is not privatization of the railways in the sense it is understood in Europe or the UK, for example. The entire railways are not being privatized, but there are parts of the railways, bits of it, which are being privatized.
Okay, staying with you, Mr. Raghunandan. So, who will benefit from all of this?
The way it is structured now, the only benefits will be the private concessionaires who will be given these different sectors or railway stations or whatever it is to run, they will benefit. The passengers as a whole, I don't see them benefiting because, number one, all the services, rail services, trains which are being privatized are premium services which cater to only a very small percentage of the population.
All right, so Mr. Guruswamy, how would these plans have an impact on the ordinary Indians, the working class, the migrant workers?
They could benefit to the extent that, there'll be more coaches available for them, for their regular trains. That is for a start. And the other thing is that, already right now you have coaches reserved for upper classes. And it's actually quite sad to see miserable conditions in the lower class and fairly comfortable travel in the upper class. So you won't have that. You won't have a class system, probably in the future.
All right, Mr. Raghunandan, Mr. Guruswamy said that there are miserable conditions for the poor and there's a class difference, a clear class difference that we see. Do you agree?
Yeah. So the argument you were giving that since these privatized trains will cater to the higher paying passengers, that will vacate a certain number of seats which will then be available to the lower classes doesn't apply. Because what they are going to do is the already premium services of the railways are going to be privatized with a few add-on luxuries such as on-board Wi-Fi or something like that, for which passengers will be charged a little even more than the premium prices they are paying now. So the seats vacated will not filter down to the lower classes at all, because the lower classes travel on very different trains and in very different coaches.
Mr. Raghunandan, could you please elaborate more on that?
Yeah. 90% of railway passengers in India travel by what is called second class or lower categories, which are non-air conditioned, not particularly comfortable trains. They are meant for the average traveler. 90% of India, especially including the poor and the lower middle class and the working class, travel by these trains and these coaches. There are trains which are intercity trains, trains which connect different major cities with the capital and so on, which are completely air conditioned even now. And obviously the poorer classes will not travel by those trains. Now, what are being privatized now in services are fully air conditioned trains only. These are the ones being privatized because this is only where the private concessionaires can make profit. So the average user of the Indian railways will remain untouched. In that sense, I think the poorer classes will lose because they will have less priority from the government, and of course they have no role to play as far as the private sector is concerned, because private sector will not make any money from these people.
All right, gentlemen, our team has collected a few media coverages in this regard, which we would really appreciate if you could take a look. So let's just get to the media and then we can come back to the question and answer session. Please stay with us.
Several committees have gone into the expansion and the modernization of Indian railways. In 2015, the expert panel chaired by Bibek Debroy, constituted by the Ministry of Railways a year earlier, recommended that the way forward for the railways was liberalization and not privatization in order to allow entry of new operators, to encourage growth and improve services. It also made it clear that a regulatory mechanism was a prerequisite to promote healthy competition and protect the interests of all stakeholders. The way privatization will affect the masses is not a question that we have to concern ourselves, well, at least in the long run. It is true that the decision is reflective of the government's effort to cut its losses given the abhorrent financial discredit suffered on account of the pandemic. As far as investment opportunities are concerned, there is value for investing these companies, as is well substantiated by their large market cap and stable financials. After missing several completion targets in the past, the Dedicated Freight Corridor Corporation of India Limited has now been given a fresh timeline ending June 2022, which appears to be a Herculean task given its snail's pace of the past. Though progress in the Dedicated Freight Corridors project is abysmally slow, the completion of the Dedicated Goods Corridor is crucial for the success of the part privatization of passenger and freight services. It is like when private banks were set up in India. So many private players came in the banking sector, but that didn't lead SBI to shut. Private investment will bring in newer technologies. It will create competition in the railway sector. Competition will increase efficiency and reduce fare in the long run, Niti Aayog CEO Amitabh Kant said. The move is being criticized by many political associations as they term it an anti-poor move. There are chances, but as for now, these trains are not going to affect the poor, as the railways will still be running 95% of total trains once these private trains start operation in full swing. However, if the government decides to go for further privatization of the sector, then it may create problems for the commoners.
All right, gentlemen, welcome back. Let's dive straight in. So, Mr. Guruswamy, recalling back what Mr. Raghunandan said, that the average person will not even be touched by the benefits that will ensue. So, can having more players involved help improve the system, or will it be detrimental?
Well, nobody will come into the low-cost travel segment, because that is where the mass volume is, and that's where 95% of the traffic is. This is a very niche segment at the top, because, there are limits to how many airports you can have, how much of air travel you can have. So this is very niche, and this is an experiment. Let's see how it goes. 1 or 2 routes they're going to try, 1 or 2 trains they're going to try, and let's see how it works. But nobody can afford to run trains at the cost Indian Railways does. That is the point I'm making.
All right, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us and for the wonderful conversation. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. And let's hope all of these end up to the benefit of the Indian nation and not only for the rich. Viewers, now we have some social media opinions which we would like you to see, and then we can conclude. Thank you.
The account of the National Students' Union of India believes that as the backbone of the country's economy, privatization of railways will have a considerable effect on the whole economy. Surav Prasad also believes that privatization is not necessary, especially when the government-owned system is not based on gaining profit, in which he sees it as an advantage of this model. The official account of the youth wing of Indian National Congress strongly criticizes the government for leaving young railway apprentices without jobs by privatizing the sector. ANI quoted from the Railway Board Chairman Vinod Kumar Yadav as saying that the private trains will start servicing by April 2023. On the other hand, Jairam Ramesh believes that this policy will not succeed as it has not worked in any other country.
And that was our episode covering the issue of Indian railway privatization. To watch bits of our episode and more updates, you can follow us on our social media platforms. Our team works really hard to make sure that you enjoy the show, so please let us know if you have any feedback or comments. We'll meet the same time, same day next week. Thanks for watching.